What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more acid-techno, and we're back with another tune from Rebeltek 7 in 2020, though I was mistaken when I introduced the record in the previous reaction for Power to the People, in that there's only one tune on here that's just by Sterling alone. The other two are with a collaborator, the first one with Mark E.G., but the track we're going to listen to now is in collaboration with Tiago Santos, a Brazilian acid-techno producer, so shout out to him as well. And yeah, we're going to listen to Time to Get Mad, which, if you know the movie Network, you will not be surprised where the sample comes from, and I swear this is one of the most sampled monologues or diatribes, rants ever in movie history, and of course the film is sort of a prescient look at what would become like the outrage media cycle, and encouraging people to not just learn about the news but to be angry about it and to manifest that anger outwardly in society, not thinking about what necessarily the consequences of that would be, and seeing malfeasance and unpleasantry in everything, and perhaps that being characteristic of a sensationalist approach to media. So again, it's a very sampled speech. I can think right away of a Formac tune, which I think is called Let's Just Get Mad? In the moment, I'm forgetting the exact name of it, but again, it samples the same speech, and I've heard it in other places as well. There's been mixes that I used it in. I do samples in my mixes beyond just the samples on the records, and I've certainly used the speech. So yeah, it's a really famous one. As I said, this is from 2020. It's by Sterling Moss and Tiago Santos, and it's called Time to Get Mad. And I do believe I used this in a DJ mix in which I use Death Note samples. Shout out to Death Note. And yes, it's the opening track on a mix I did called Right to the Point. There we go. Oof. That kick. The bass line. Deep rumbling bass line with that metallic pulse. Buzzing metallic pulse. wait for it. When it breaks down in a moment, there's this dissonant, winding, a bit demented, like arpeggio. Love that.
We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore. We sit in the house, and slowly the world we're living in is getting smaller, and all we say is, please, at least leave us alone in our living room. Let me have my toaster and my TV and my steel-belted radios, and I won't say anything. Just leave us alone. Well, I'm not going to leave you alone. I want you to get mad. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value. You've got to say, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore. I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
Needling acid line. Boiling, simmering acid line.
You've got to get mad.
Brilliant. Again, it's an absolutely bombing tune. In the moment, I'm like second guessing myself, if only because I thought for the longest time that the final two tracks, yeah, okay, this one is Sterling Moss and Tiago Santos. As I said, I thought for a long time that there were two by Sterling himself and then the other one by Sterling and Mark, but turns out that when I first got this record, I think this one was my favorite. I think they're all basically on the same level, or I've come to think that, but when I did buy the record initially back in 2020, I do think this one was my favorite. And again, like, it's a great sample for multiple reasons. Like, there's parts of it that I think everyone can identify with. Certainly people who feel that, you know, the powerful and the authoritarian and those inclined to use violence to achieve their means, that they are exploiting and oppressing others. So it's those type of lines, I think, can resonate with a lot of people who feel that, you know, there's reason to be dissident. But I do think that, you know, maybe some people like don't fully appreciate the context of the lines in the film, in which like there's a bit of irony, because the type of movement that's created through the initial issuing of these lines, which is sort of like this anchor just kind of like, you know, loses it, and on air, and they just keep filming, like, no, don't stop filming, and people really do start going to their windows and shouting out that they're mad as hell and they're not going to take it anymore. But it becomes like dogmatic, it becomes cultish, and then, you know, sort of the essence of the original phrases that are used, which are already like a bit like historical nostalgia. They're a bit like, oh, I'm thinking back to the good old days, and you know, there's always a danger of thinking that. I say that as a historian who is very aware that lots of folks are inclined to remember the good things about earlier days but not the bad things, which can be a dangerous idea if you're thinking about earlier decades or centuries as some idyllic time when there were no problems. But again, like, these lines are very understandable and easy to sympathize with, but in the context of the film they become this sort of Animal Farm irony, in that the people who are initially inspired by it become sort of dogmatic about it, and the network itself becomes like this propaganda mouthpiece. So yeah, I think it's a very well chosen sample, I think very well used. And that bass line, again, I've talked about it, Sterling's tracks have these great kick drums and bass lines, because, you know, he's worked on like Roland drum machines. You know, he like not only is a great producer, but he's involved in like engineering of like drum machines and sound kits with Roland Corporation. And I think this is another great example, but that bass line in particular, I love that sort of, you know, the track really thins out a little bit. There's a sense of, you know, uncomfortable anticipation, and then boom, it drops in with that bass line, and that's one of my favorite moments. And I will say, the like dissonant, a bit wicked arpeggio which shows up in the breakdown, and then we hear it again like shortly before the end of the tune, that might be my favorite element overall. I just absolutely love that sound. So big shout out to Sterling and Tiago. Let me know what you think of this one, and let me actually check, because now that I brought it up, I feel like I have to look for the Formek tune, which samples this same speech from Network, just because. Not that one. This one. Nope. I know there may not be a whole lot of crossover here, people who are fond of both acid-techno and early hardcore / gabber, but for those of us who are, let me just make sure. Yeah, it's a 10-inch limited release, and it's mad as hell, of course. I was saying like get mad, but no, it's mad as hell. And as I said, this is a sample set that has been used in a number of tracks over the years. So shout out to Sterling and Tiago, shout out to Formek, shout out to acid-techno and hardcore. Do let me know what you think of this one, and I will see you next time. Peace.